that we wanted to share with you about work that's been going on in our district. The first topic that I think is critically important, not just to the Denver Public Schools, but to our entire community, is around preventing youth violence. And I am really disheartened to share the unfortunate update that our community has seen an increase in youth violence and gang activity as we see the outrage over the racial injustice and police action continuing. Unfortunately, this year so far to date, we have already lost 7 students to violence compared to 6 students in all of the 1920 school year. As educators, we care deeply about the well-being of our students and their families, and we must do everything that we can to prevent youth violence and the losses to our community. Schools help create safe and healing relationships with students by using trauma-informed practices, providing mental health supports, implementing restorative practices, and leveraging student engagement programs, community partnerships, and collaboration among our teams. Please help us by sharing the word about the many resources that are available to our students to stay safe, including Colorado's Safe to Tell program, which allows students and community members to reach out anonymously with any concerns. Reaching out to their schools, families and students can reach out to their schools for a list of the community resources and mentoring programs that we have available, and the 6 safe zones in Denver and 2 in Aurora that launched over the summer in neighborhoods that have seen higher levels of youth violence. Preventing youth violence is a community-wide effort, and the Denver Public Schools will continue its work to help bring about the end of this tragic loss of young lives. The second thing that we wanted to share is more information about our return to in-person learning plans. As you know, we were excited to begin welcoming back kindergarten, first grade, and special education students in kindergarten through 2nd grade beginning September 28th. From September 28th through October 2nd, kindergarten students and some first grade students, as well as our primary special education center program students, will return to in-person learning. From October 5th through 9th, all first grade students will begin to phase in for in-person learning. And finally, our students in grades 2 through 5 will begin returning to in-person learning on October 21st. For our middle and high school students, we're continuing our efforts to support our schools with scheduling supports and cohort guidance. We expect that our students in 6th through 12th grade will also return at the beginning of 2nd quarter to a mix of in-person and remote learning. As a reminder, we've asked our families to commit to their preferred learning option, either the fully virtual program or in-person, by the end of this week. And we know many families have asked for information about what secondary in particular will look like. And this is one of the challenges. We actually do need to know what families are selecting, either in person or virtual, to be able to create the schedules to answer many of those questions. So if families have not answered that option, they will automatically be enrolled in the virtual program. So we'd love to open it up for any questions you may have.
All right, thank you. And our first question is from Melanie at Chalkbeat about in-person school. First question is the choice parents make by Friday binding for the rest of the year? Also, how has the district announced what the hybrid model for middle and high school will look like? How many days per week would be in-person versus virtual? And finally, lots of parents are wondering about class sizes. I saw cohorts would be limited to 35 students. What about class sizes?
Yeah, so thank you. So the choice that parents are making will be binding only for the remainder of 2nd quarter. We'll revisit those selections at semester. We definitely understand the challenges of both making the selection in advance, as well as wanting to have some flexibility in terms of when families can make changes, either from in-person to virtual or virtual to in-person. So we will be working on that for 2nd semester. In terms of what it'll look like at the middle and high school levels, and I'll try to answer the two questions together. A lot of our scheduling really is dictated on the number of students who want to be in person and the requirements around the size of cohorts. We are very committed to maintaining small cohort sizes, and for our folks who are not as deeply engaged in the language around cohorts versus classes. A cohort would be the total number of students that can interact over the period of time when they're in person. Class sizes will likely be smaller than a cohort size, and class enrollment will largely be dictated by two factors: the number of students who are selecting in-person learning and the size of classrooms, so that we can ensure that there's a minimum of 3 feet of social distance between all students within a room. And so it's very likely that there will be fewer than 35 students in any specific class. In terms of the number of days that people would be in person, it likely will be similar to many of the districts in hybrid, with a minimum of 2 days of in-person learning in our buildings.
Thank you. Lori from 9 News asks, has the DPS board and administrative positions begun returning to offices and in-person meetings as well? If not, when will that transition begin?
Yeah, so thank you. Yeah, actually, we are returning. Many of our central office support teams have returned. I'm actually in my building. You can't see it now with my Zoom background. I'm in my office. We had board members who participated in board meetings in a combination of in their homes and here at Emily Griffith campus. As a reminder, we are really working to enforce the expectation that adult meetings be handled virtually. We really want to limit the impact of exposure. And so we have asked all of our school teams as well as our support teams to reserve the time for in-person work, particularly in our schools, to the interactions with students and teachers in a cohort. For our adult staff who are working in our central office buildings, we still are following the governor's requirements around a maximum of 50% of a workforce in person at any given time in our offices. Our central offices are subject to the rules around all businesses, not specifically schools. And so at any given time, we will have fewer than our full staff working in our buildings, our support offices, to follow along with those guidelines. And we will continue to conduct our work with each other using technology.
Thank you. And Kim asks, Cherry Creek High School and other schools, after seeing those positive cases, is there any concern about reopening?
Yeah, and I think it's really, Cherry Creek is a really good example. Cherry Creek High School is a really good example of why we are approaching our work in our secondary schools with very explicit expectations around cohort sizes. The number of students who were exposed in Cherry Creek is larger than our cohort sizes, and the number of teachers as a result of that who need to go into a quarantine, not because they are actually sick, but just because they were exposed to students, is what has required the large number of students to shift into remote learning for the next 2 weeks, when teachers are impacted and have to go into quarantine, not because they're sick, but just because they've been exposed. It makes it incredibly challenging to host all of the schedules for students. And so many of the students in Cherry Creek are actually not exposed. They just aren't able to offer all of their courses in person because of the number of teachers. And so we think that's really helpful rationale for why we are maintaining small cohort sizes for our secondary students. We really want to minimize the impact of disruptions and maximize the opportunities that we have for in-person support for our students. In some schools and in some cases, that in-person support may be coupled with lots of ongoing virtual classwork as well, because we know we want to make sure that we are supporting our students with the full, robust course offerings that are so critical to their academic development, but really also emphasizing the opportunities for in-person access to caring educators, to interactions with peers, to the social emotional supports I think it's really heartening to hear from our students. We don't always hear from our students that they want to be in school, but it has been really gratifying to hear how ready and anxious kids are to be able to get back in school with their teachers.
Thanks. And from Melanie with Chalkbeat, with regard to the 7 students lost to violence, is this since August 24th?
I'll have to check and see. We've been keeping tabs both last year and this year, so I need to check and see if that includes numbers from the summer. But Melanie, we can get back to you on that. And I'll read this next question from Jackie. So, ¿cuál va a ser el protocolo del distrito si alguien en el personal o un estudiante resulta enfermo con COVID-19 durante las clases presenciales? So, muchísimas gracias por la pregunta. Estamos trabajando con Denver Health sobre los protocolos de cuarentena y también de si una persona está si tiene COVID, esta persona tiene que aislarse, tiene que estar solos. Cualquier persona que estuvo en su grupo, los maestros o los estudiantes, también tienen que pasar a una cuarentena de 14 días. Y es muy importante, por eso estamos muy fijados en el tamaño del grupo de alumnos y estamos usando el número de 35 alumnos que pueden estar en un grupo y puede ser que tiene 2 clases con 20 personas en una y 15 en la otra que pueden mezclar o sea, por ejemplo, 2 clases de primer grado, los 2 clases se pueden tener interacciones, pero solamente si no es arriba de 35 personas para eliminar el riesgo o minimizar el riesgo de interrupciones por la causa de COVID.
Thank you. And from Janet at 9 News, how has delaying the start of in-person learning helped DPS prepare? Have you been in contact with other schools who have already had in-person learning in place?
Yeah, so thank you. I think it's been helpful in a couple of different ways, including being able to experience the learnings from districts that have opened prior to our opening. Certainly, as the largest school district in Colorado, the amount of PPE and the work to prepare our buildings, many of which are significantly older than our surrounding districts' buildings, it really did give us the time to ensure that we had the ability to install plexiglass dividers, for example, in offices, to do all of the HVAC upgrades. Our board approved a $5 million expense to improve the filtration systems in all of our HVAC systems. It also has been really critically important, as you know, we are not able to use many of the cooling mechanisms in our buildings that lack air conditioning. And even this week, we're midway through September, we're still experiencing days in the 80s. And certainly, the week of Labor Day, we had weather in the hundreds even. And so without those cooling mechanisms, it would have been incredibly challenging to have students in person. And so it's helped us both to work with the weather, get the PPE, build out the plans without minimizing the impact of learning. We wanted to make sure that we were starting the year with a real focus on quality learning for our students and giving our schools the time to get ready for that gradual return to in-person learning while simultaneously focusing on significantly improved remote learning has been very beneficial for us.
Thanks. And Melanie with Chalkbeat, has the district dug into the reasons why attendance in virtual classes has been higher for elementary students than middle and high school students and higher for white students than students of color?
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I was Somehow I missed that question. Can you repeat it, please?
No, sure. So Melanie from Chalkbeat asks, has the district dug into the reasons why attendance in virtual classes has been higher for elementary students than middle and high school students, and higher for white students than students of color?
Yeah, so thank you. Initially, when we saw the attendance data, we really wanted to make sure that we were checking on supports around technology to make sure that there weren't tech barriers that were keeping students from being able to engage. And I know I even personally interacted with a parent who was having challenges with her daughter being able to log into classes, things like that. So we wanted to absolutely make sure that that wasn't the barrier. We do know that for our lower income families, many of whom are communities of color, even with the support of programs like Comcast's Internet Essentials program, that the bandwidth and the speed, the download rates are lower than families who have purchased premium packages. And we do know that even with those supports, at times it can be really challenging for our families to maneuver through the technology aspects of engaging with remote. So we are definitely digging into that. We have seen increased attendance overall from last spring, which we think is really beneficial with regular live instruction times, significant outreach to students for participation. And we actually are in the effort to contact all of the students who had no contact with us to determine if they have moved, where they are, why they're not engaging. So we're seeing those numbers go down as well to be able to do that. Typically we do see higher attendance in elementary than we do in middle and high school, and that's true in person as well as in this environment. It's really important, and we know and understand that for some of our students, particularly students in our pathway schools, many of them have gone to work to help support their families, and so we're really
All right, so I think we've had a couple audio issues and it looks like we might be frozen. So let me see if I can get superintendent to, oh,
Can you
there
hear
she
me?
is.
Yeah.
Now we can see you, now we can hear you.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, I'm in my office, but we are having internet problems for sure. I just got a note that says my internet connection is unstable, so I apologize.
No worries. Okay, it looks like we might have lost you again. Give me just 1 second.
Let's see if that works. Can you hear me now?
I can hear. I think we're good.
Okay.
Okay. I'm sorry, I'm
Well,
not sure where we left off here. I think it went
perfect. Yep. I was just saying that typically, even when we're in person, attendance at elementary is significantly higher than attendance at secondary. We are doing lots of outreach, both to students who have been participating but might be absent, as well as students who we believe are enrolled but have not yet verified or participated, because we know how critical it's going to be for kids to be engaged. And we're hopeful that as we return to in-person learning, that we will also see an increase in participation.
Great, and then we do have a question from Jackie at Telemundo, if you want to take that in Spanish as well.
You know what? Can you repost the question? When I rejoined, it lost the chat. Para los estudiantes que usan los camiones escolares como transporte, ¿qué guías van a ejercer para minimizar los contagios para este grupo? Muy importante. So, en los autobuses escolares tenemos que asegurar que son menos personas que usan el autobús. Es difícil, quiere decir que no podemos ofrecer la misma cantidad de transportación con los autobuses como en el pasado. Estamos asegurando que los alumnos que califican para transportación por razones de la educación especial o porque son en los programas de Newcomer Centers para los que están aprendiendo inglés como primer idioma, como segundo idioma y apenas han llegado, que ofrecemos transportación a ellos. También algunos en nuestras primarias, pero desafortunadamente no podemos ofrecer la misma cantidad de transportación para nuestros alumnos en la secundaria y preparatoria por la causa de que no se puede poner tanta gente en los autobuses.
Great. And then our last question is from Lori at 9. You said most board meetings and admin staff will try to communicate as much as possible being remote, but also curious to know how DPS can already be moving back to in-person learning for students while leadership is aiming to stay remote. In light of that, is leadership encouraging students to do the remote learning option as well? What would it have to happen to cause DPS to push the dates on in-person learning for each respective grade?
Sure. And let me clarify, we're actually not asking staff members to stay remote. We're asking staff members when they are working in our buildings to continue to use technology for the purposes of interacting with other adults. And that is so that we can maintain as much of a healthy, safe environment for everybody who works in DPS. And so, as I mentioned, I'm in the office. My staff is in the office. We are interacting with each other. But our meetings, when we are in person, when we are hosting meetings, we're using technology to do that while we're here in the office. And we know that's something that will help us protect each other. It's something that we're doing in our schools as well, is we're asking that all adult meetings happen using technology while we're in our school buildings, because we really want to make sure that we're maximizing the opportunity for adults and children to interact in their cohorts. And so that's going to continue to be our focus, is how we can prepare for the safest, healthiest environment for student learning to occur. And we know that for many of our students, the right choice may be the 100% virtual program. We've spoken with many families who are deeply committed to that. And for other children, it is critically important that they get access to in-person supports. And so we want to make sure that we are focusing on how we can support everybody with the opportunities that work best for their learning style, for their learning needs, and minimize any potential disruptions from exposure to COVID.
Great. And a couple minutes left for one more. Tori is asking, how many families have expressed interest in continuing with remote learning?
Yeah, so thank you, Tori. We have been in the low 30% range district-wide with families who are requesting the continuing in the 100% virtual program. And so we're gonna see what those numbers look like as we finish out this week with the request for families to complete annual family update so that we can build out schedules for, particularly for our secondary students.
Okay, thank you all so much.
And apologies for the technology issues. It certainly is part of the new world that we work in and live in. So I thank you for your time today.
All right, thanks everyone.